The conversation trick that quietly shifts power. Most people think power in conversation comes from speaking the most, speaking the loudest, or speaking with the most confidence. But in reality, power often shifts in a much quieter way. It moves through subtle psychological signals that most people never notice, yet they feel the effects of them immediately. There is a conversational pattern that quietly changes the balance between two people. It doesn't involve aggression, threats, or manipulation in the obvious sense. Instead, it works by controlling the rhythm of attention, response, and validation. When someone understands this pattern, they can influence how a conversation unfolds without appearing forceful at all. The trick is very simple, yet extremely powerful. It involves controlling three elements: response timing, emotional validation, and conversational framing. Let's start with response timing. In everyday conversations, most people respond immediately. Someone asks a question, and they answer right away. Someone makes a comment, and they react quickly. But people who hold conversational power often do something different. They allow a small pause before responding. This pause is not accidental. It creates a subtle psychological shift. When a person pauses, it signals that they are not reacting automatically. Instead, it communicates that they are evaluating what was said. The other person unconsciously begins to wait for their response. That waiting changes the dynamic. Suddenly, the person who paused appears more composed, more thoughtful, and often more authoritative. The conversation begins to revolve around their reaction. The second element is emotional validation. In many conversations, people either agree or disagree directly. But there is a third option that can shift power more effectively. Instead of agreeing or disagreeing immediately, a person can acknowledge the emotion behind what the other person said. For example, if someone says, "This situation is really frustrating," the response might be, "I can see why that would feel frustrating." Notice what happens psychologically. The speaker feels understood, their emotional tension drops, and the person offering validation becomes the one guiding the emotional tone of the conversation. This technique does not mean you agree with everything someone says. It simply means you recognize the emotion they are experiencing. And when someone feels emotionally understood, they become more open to influence. The third element is conversational framing. Framing means subtly defining how a situation should be interpreted. When people frame a conversation effectively, they shape the meaning of what is happening. Imagine two people discussing a problem at work. One person says, "This project is a disaster." Another person responds, "It's definitely challenging, but it's also something we can fix, step by step." The second person just reframed the situation. The same facts exist, but the emotional meaning has changed. The conversation moves from panic toward problem solving. People who consistently control framing often become the psychological anchor in conversations. Others begin to look to them for direction, even if they never claim authority. When response timing, emotional validation, and framing work together, something interesting happens. The conversation gradually reorganizes around one person's calm presence. They are not dominating the discussion. They are simply guiding the structure of it. Many leaders, therapists, negotiators, and experienced communicators use these patterns naturally. They may not even consciously think about them anymore. But the psychological effects remain powerful. Now, it's important to understand something here. These techniques can be used in positive or negative ways. They can help create understanding and stability in difficult conversations, but they can also be used to quietly control or manipulate discussions. This is why awareness is important. Once you recognize these patterns, you begin to see them everywhere. In professional negotiations, in family discussions, in workplace meetings, even in everyday casual conversations. You might notice someone pausing before responding, giving calm emotional validation, and reframing the discussion in subtle ways. When this happens repeatedly, they gradually become the psychological center of the conversation. And interestingly, this does not require dominance. In fact, the quieter the technique, the more effective it often becomes. Power in conversation is rarely about volume. It is about composure. It is about the ability to slow down the emotional pace of an interaction, understand what the other person is feeling, and gently guide how the discussion is interpreted. When you learn to recognize this, you gain two advantages. First, you can use these skills to create calmer, more productive conversations in your own life. Instead of reacting quickly, you can pause, acknowledge emotion, and reframe situations constructively. Second, You become less vulnerable to being influenced by these patterns when others use them intentionally. You begin to notice when someone is trying to control the emotional rhythm of a conversation, and simply recognizing that shift can restore balance. Human communication is full of subtle psychological signals. Most people focus on the words being spoken, but the real influence often comes from the structure around those words, the timing of a response, the validation of an emotion, the framing of a situation. When those elements are used thoughtfully, they can transform an ordinary conversation into a moment of genuine understanding and leadership. And sometimes the most powerful shift in a conversation happens not when someone speaks louder, but when they learn to guide the conversation quietly.